How to create architect solutions. Let's have a look. First of all, you need an eCognition developer license. And what we're going to do is connect the rule set with actions. So creating a simplified user interface and keeping the rule set in the background, right? That's the idea. I'm going to show you how to create sliders and buttons in the user interface and then how to connect it with the rule set. And we're going to use variables, right? Variables defined in the action, and they are connected to the rule set, to certain processes, and you're going to need also parameter sets. And in general, there are two strategies possible. First one is one rule set per action, and that is very useful if you want to create an app with a fixed workflow. Or the other one is one rule set per action library, and this one is useful if you want to create an app with a flexible workflow. That's gonna make sense at the end of this video, but yeah, remember those two possible strategies. Let's first have a look at a few terms that I'm going to use frequently during this video. First of all, rule set, and I think you're aware what a rule set is. You see it here in the process tree on the right hand side. So it's a set of processes that defines your analysis workflow, right? And it's executed from top to bottom. And actions are here, what you see here in the analysis builder. Actually, that's a window where you create an architect solution. And a single action is here, for example, this item. And one action can have multiple widgets. And those widgets, I'm going to show you how to implement those, but those can be sliders, checkboxes, as you see here, drop downs, and so on. And those widgets, if you, for example, have a slider, which defines a threshold, and in the background, then this threshold is stored in variables. So you need to use variables, and that variable is then used in the rule set, right? So you have to have the same variable in the widget and in the corresponding section of the rule set where you want to use this value. Right? And how is that communication done? That is done via parameter sets. So parameter sets are important or are necessary to communicate between your actions here and the rule set. So that's a must have. And an action library is the collection of multiple actions. It also can be one action, and you can save it and load it in other projects. And finally, solutions. And a solution represents a specific order of the actions in your action library. So in a solution, you more or less save a workflow that is defined by the actions in the action library, and also the parameters, so the values of the widgets. If you, for example, have an NDVI slider for threshold and you saved the solution when you had this at 0.4, then this value is going to be loaded as well. And it also includes the rule set in the background. When you load the action library and afterwards the solution defines the order of the actions from the action library. I'm going to show you that right away, I would say. So here is eCognition developer, and I'm quickly gonna load a rule set that I have and an image. And what I want to do is creating a simplified user interface and keeping the rule set in the background, right? Let's load the rule set. It's in the data folder called easyruleset.dcp. And you see here, it's very simple. It's segmentation and classification, segmentation and quadtree based segmentation. Then we compute the NDVI and then use it to classify image objects. Let's give it a go. First, we're going to run the quadtree with 2750. That's the scale parameter. And yeah, it results in objects like this. So larger objects where you have more homogeneous areas. And then the NDVI, right? We get an additional layer here in the view settings. It's a temporary layer in the project. High values correspond to vegetation, low values to non-vegetation. And then the classification based on a threshold of 0.1 using only the NDVI. So all objects that are red now are classified as vegetation based on the NDVI and the threshold 0.1. Now let's try to put that into a nice user interface. Okay. And first, what we have to do is go to Architect and choose new action library, because we're going to create actions that are connected to those processes. and those actions are stored in an action library. I'm gonna call it new action library, leave it default, and here in the location, simply put it somewhere where you're gonna find it again. There we go, hit OK, and now this window here pops up automatically, the edit library window, and I'm gonna put it here on the left-hand side. So we're gonna have the rule set here on the right, and we're gonna build our solution here in this interface. Okay, and first thing I'm gonna do is saving this rule set. I'm gonna choose save rule set as. I'm gonna save it in the action library folder and simply gonna call it rule set. I'm doing this because we are altering the rule set, right? And I want to keep the original. And now this is in the action library folder. So it's also clear that this rule set belongs to the action library, right? It doesn't have to be there, but it makes life easier. Trust me. Let's start editing, and I'm quickly going to check if editing mode is active. So if you go to architect, you see edit action library, and that means we can edit our action library. If you want to execute your action library and execute the widgets, you need to exit the editing, right? So if you're in editing mode, you're altering the actions and the widgets, but you cannot execute it. Now here in this analysis builder window, you first have to right click actually before you start and add a group, right? So you can add multiple groups, and within a group you can have multiple actions. You can change the color. I'm simply gonna call the group segmentation and give it a black color maybe. Let's see. Okay, so that's the icon here that you get. That's one group. And now we can add actions to this group. If you right click here, you can choose add action definition. And now we can add an action, and I'm gonna call this action quadtree segmentation. Now we need to do two more things. First, define the parameter set and then the rule set file. The parameter set is needed in order to establish the communication between the action and the rule set. And yeah, a parameter set is a set of parameters, so a set of variables and arrays, a collection of those. And it can be helpful if you want to bundle some variables or arrays, or in this case, it's necessary again for communication between the rule set and the action. And we're gonna create a parameter set here for this quadtree segmentation. You simply can type it in here, and I'm gonna call it parameter set segmentation in this case. And here's a bit more additional information about a parameter set. So for each action, you only can define one parameter set. The widgets that you define for this action can only use the variables that are stored in this specific parameter set. So we're gonna create variables in the action, and those have to be in the parameter set that is again needed for the rule set, for the section in the rule set to update the variable from the UI. So from the widget from your action. And yeah, when defining a variable in a widget, the variable will be automatically added to the respective parameter set that you have defined in the action. And that means you do not have to do anything manually. But if you want to see how a parameter set looks like and what variables or arrays are stored in the parameter set, you can go to process, manage parameter sets, and there you're going to see all the parameter sets stored in your rule set and their respective variables or arrays. Now the only thing that's missing is the rule set file for this action definition, and we're going to choose this rule set that we've just saved in the action library directory. Hit OK, and then take a few seconds to celebrate, because you now have successfully created your first action in eCognition Developer. And now we want to create a widget that allows us to interactively define the size of the quadtree segmentation, right? Currently it's defined as 2750, but we want to have this dynamically with a slider. And what you have to do in order to create a widget, you have to right click here into this gray area and choose add group. You can give that a color. I'm just gonna leave it default. You can give the group a name. I'm gonna call it settings maybe. And now if you right click into this group, you can add different widgets. A checkbox, drop down list, buttons, radio button, toolbars, select image layer, select folder. So a lot of predefined widgets, and we're gonna go for add edit box with slider. And the slider should enable us to choose the scale parameter for the quad tree based segmentation. That means I want to have a one-click solution, not a two-click solution where the user has to define the size and then hit a button to execute it. Just a slider, and if you release the slider, the segmentation is executed automatically. And here in this interface, you can configure the widget. First of all, text on the left, let's choose min for minimum value, text on the right, maybe max. Then description, you can fill something in here. That's gonna pop up here on the underneath the widget actually in the interface. And I think it's also gonna display it when you hover with the mouse over that widget as additional information. So please define the quad tree size value or whatever. Description image, so you can add an image to the description, and so show height conditions, enable, disable, whatever. Then the variable, this is very important. This will be stored in the parameter set, and again the parameter set is communicating with the rule set. I'm gonna create a variable here, just type the name in here, and that's a scene variable, hit OK, and that's created and automatically stored in the parameter set. Maximum value 5000, minimum value, well, let's go for 500. Then tick frequency, that's simply a display thing, so how many ticks you see in the slider, and jump value, how precisely you allow the user to define this variable. And yeah, now last but not least, we have to define here the process on change. So what happens if the value is changed? You don't have to do it if you plan to have a slider to set a variable and afterwards create maybe a button which states execute or apply segmentation or something like that. But in our case, I wanted to have the slider, and if you release the slider, it should execute something immediately, meaning the segmentation. So what you have to do is define here the process on change. So what is happening if you change something in the slider, and that refers to the position in the rule set. In our case, what I want to have is segmentation executed. So this, the parent process here, segmentation, so the whole section. And this simply will do the trick, segmentation. And that's the path to the section in the rule set, okay? I'm quickly gonna hit OK and show you that. So how can you find the path in the rule set to certain processes? If you right click on the process and choose go to, it displays the process path, which you can simply copy and then also paste, right? It's trivial now because that's the parent process, but if you enter some child processes, it might be difficult to get the path right. So you simply can click on that process that you want to be executed, go to, and then you get here the path. So you see the structure here, // and then you can copy this one, paste it into that widget definition, and then it's gonna execute exactly this process and all the child processes within this one. Okay. All right, let's give it a go and see if this widget, this action is working already. To execute the widget, we have to exit the editing mode. So please go to Architect and click the Edit Action Library, so it's unchecked. And now we can use this widget. So move the slider around, you see something has changed. But if we play around a bit more, it doesn't change anymore. So it's somewhat not working properly. You see actually left of the slider, you see the value. So this one is changing, right, based on the slider. So that's good. But the issue is that in the rule set, we still have this fixed value definition, so 2750, and for the scale, right? So it's not adjusted. What we have to do is simply use that variable that we've created, right? That is defined in the widget. Let's see if this is now working. So I'm moving the slider. Okay, it did something and created a lot of objects. So still not 100% correct. And the issue here is, as you see in the object information window, actually, this variable is set to 0. And that's the information from the rule set. However, in the parameter set, it's 4400, like you see here in the widget. What we have to add, we have to establish the communication between the action and the rule set. And there is one algorithm, very simple. Use this one, apply active action to variable. Put that before the segmentation, so right into that parent process, and then it's going to work just fine. So you need this one in order to update the variable in the rule set based on the variable definition in the action. Okay, and I guess this looks fine. So I move the slider around and it updates automatically because we have this this change that is applied immediately after you release or define the variable. I'm quickly gonna copy and paste this process here, apply active action to variable, into the classification section and put it on top. So that's gonna run smoothly right away. And let's go back to editing. So architect, edit action library. And now we want to address the classification, okay? We're first gonna add a group. I'm gonna call it classification. And hit OK. Now again, we can add an action definition. In this case, I'm gonna call it classify based on NDVI. We have to define a parameter set, and again, this is specific to an action, so we need to create a new parameter set. And I'm gonna call it parameter set classification, very simple. And then the rule set file, we have to navigate to that rule set that is stored in the action library directory. And hit OK. Right click here in the gray area because we're want to add a widget. So first we have to create a group. I'm gonna call it settings. Okay. And now I'm gonna first of all add select image layer. That is a widget which lets you select an image layer, right? And to compute the NDVI, we simply need two layers, the near infrared and the red layers. And I want to create an application which allows the user using this simplified user interface to select the respective layers. So it's not hard coded because not always layer 3 is your red band, right? It's always different. So I'm allowing this flexibility. So I renamed the text to image layer red, so the user knows he has to enter here the red layer, and then the variable, there's already a variable stored that was left over in the rule set. You simply can type in here a new variable. In this case, I'm gonna go for var underscore layer underscore red. Then this pops up, create a layer variable, leave this default, hit OK. And now we're simply gonna add a short description to this widget. Select the red layer. And I think that's already it. Hit OK. See here that widget, and I'm copy and pasting this one and simply change this here to the near infrared. Create a variable and select the near layer. So we've created two variables that a user can define here. Those layers are going to be used for the NDVI calculation, and then we have this assign class section. And for that one, to execute everything, I'm simply going to add a button. Going to call it go, maybe. And let's add a description because that's always helpful for a user. Execute the classification. Now let's define what happens if you hit the button, you have two options here: process on press or process on release, and that's again referring to the process in the process tree. So classification, and it's gonna execute all the child processes. Let's have a look how this looks like. Not perfect. You also can double click on the widget, right? So go, I want to have this on the button actually. And the text should be execute. All right, let's change it execute. And there's a button text, enter go. That's more like it. And that's gonna execute, or the idea is that if you hit this go, it's gonna execute the classification process. Yep, and we have this apply active action to variables already in there. So that's gonna update the variables, so the image layer red and near infrared, and it's gonna use them for the NDVI calculation. But yeah, it only can use them if we change it here. So get rid of the static definition here, and we're gonna choose the variables that we use in the widgets. That should work fine. And yeah, for the assign class, we also have to add something, right? Here we use the NDVI, so we compute it beforehand, and then we use a fixed threshold here for of 0.1. But what we want to do is we want the user to define this in a dynamic way. So we create a variable here, right? So let's create a variable NDVI threshold. And let's add also a slider here where this variable is updated, right? So right click here, edit box with slider and text on the left. Yeah, let's simply put text on the left NDVI threshold. Let's first set the maximum value to 1 and minimum to -1, so that's the range of the NDVI. Tick frequency 0.2 and jump value 0.05. Yeah, the variable, now we have to choose the variable, and we're gonna choose the one that we've just created in the rule set. It's available here in the drop down. And yeah, the workflow here now is choose the red band, the near, define the threshold, and then hit go. So let's try it, exit the edit mode. And I'm also gonna save the rule set, safety first, right? And you also can save the action library from time to time. It doesn't hurt. So architect save action library. And let's try it out. So my red band is layer 3, my near infrared is layer 4. I'm quickly going to delete the NDVI so we see if this is really working, and set the NDVI threshold to point something, hit go. Okay, it didn't work as expected. So it didn't create the NDVI layer. Let's go back to editing mode and see what we can improve here. So somehow the process on release was deleted, but I think it has to be the process on press. So let's simply add classification here and try again. And yes, awesome. So if you hit go, you see we created this temporary NDVI layer on the left in the view settings, right? And it classifies the image objects based on this threshold. Let's go lower, -0.5, it classifies a lot. And now increase it and it stays red, which is interesting. I'll give you a few seconds to think about why this is happening. Yeah, the reason is that all objects are now classified, and it tries to classify objects that are already classified. So we simply can add this remove classification algorithm, and this one removes the classification from the image object, so all become unclassified. And that's gonna help here because it then can classify the unclassified into this red class vegetation again, right? And yeah, that's gonna solve our issue. Let's hit go and see if it works. Right, so it first removes it, then updates the variables, computes the NDVI, and then runs the classification. And from the start, the quadtree-based segmentation, run it, and then define the NDVI threshold and execute it. Right? And that's going to work fine now with the remove classification algorithm. Okay, I think that's it. We're going to stop here with this little application here. We created a nice user interface and the rule set in the background is hidden. So actually also a non-eCognition expert with the knowledge about the algorithm, stuff like that, can now utilize the technology simply using this interface and the sliders, right? So fairly simple. Now what you have to do is save the rule set and the action library. So under architect, save action library, and you also can save the solution. And if you save the solution, actually this will include here the structure. So first quad-tree segmentation and classify based on NDVI, and also stores your configuration. So the NDVI threshold in this case of 0.25 if you want to save it at, if I save it now with 2.5, and it also going to store the setting for the quad-tree, right? And in the solution, so this also includes the rule set. So solution is the rule set and the configuration and the order of your actions. And to be honest, we are just scratching the surface here. A small gimmick actually would be that you can add an icon in the action definition to your action, right? I'm simply going to add a JPEG file, but you can add a TIFF file, a PNG file, and an icon file. So different formats are supported. PNG would be actually nicer because PNG supports transparency, but I simply found this JPEG on my desktop, so I'm gonna use this one. One more cool feature is that you can actually create your own toolbar. So as you see up here, these icons and those buttons, you also can create them yourself. For your solution, if you go to architect, you will find this analysis builder toolbar, and then this window opens here, and actually you can create your own toolbar. For example, you can create a button, a reset button that resets everything and deletes levels and stuff like that. So this is also pretty cool. Let's check if we've saved everything correctly. So please, again, save the rule set, save the action library and the solution. And then first I'm going to close the project. So the second X button on top right corner, then go to architect, and we're gonna close the action library. Last but not least, right clicking the process tree, delete rule set, and now we have a clean project. And now I'm gonna load the action library again. Architect, open action library, choose the folder, right? That's all you need. And you see here, action library is here, and if I click the plus button, I have my action here defined. But now the advantage of having a solution is if you load that solution file, you're gonna get the layout that we had before, right? And the rule set is there as well. And that's how you create an architect solution. And now, before we finish this video, a small exercise for you. Please try to create a solution simply using the multi-threshold segmentation. So the idea is to do a multi-threshold segmentation using the NDVI, and you create a user interface more or less like we did right now, where the user inputs the red band and the near band and then defines a threshold for segmentation. And the segmentation used should be the multi-threshold. And you might know that the multi-threshold segmentation does segmentation and classification in one step, and the result's going to be slightly more meaningful if you're looking for nice outlines for the vegetation compared to the quad-tree based segmentation that we have used here in this exercise. Just go ahead and try it, and you'll see if you understood here the concepts that I showed you here in this video. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. Enjoy eCognition Architect, and have a look at our community and the knowledge base, because we try to upload some solutions to the knowledge base so you can use them, discover other functionalities that I didn't show here in this video, and yeah, just give us feedback. Thank you very much for watching, and see ya.